Good morning. Good morning. Welcome in IGNU MA classes. Today we are listening philosophy of religion, MA philosophy of religion, block number 1, unit number 1. Definition and scope of philosophy of religion. Objectives: to initiate the students to the issues related to the philosophy of religion, to have a general understanding of religion and its philosophical studies, to understand the different ways of understanding religion and philosophy of religion. Introduction: what is philosophy of religion? How do we define it? What is its scope? These are some of the issues we will be taking up in this unit. This unit attempts to introduce the students to some of the issues of philosophy of religion, including the definition of religion. Then it seeks to study the scope of religion. Philosophy as a community project. Etymologically, the word philosophy comes from two Greek words, philos, lover or friend, and sophia, wisdom. Philosophy then is a love of wisdom, and the philosopher is a friend or a lover of it. Some important conclusion can always be drawn this fact. Philosophy is not the position of wisdom. A a philosopher is not a proud Mr. Know It All who has all of the answers to everyone's question. He is a quester after truth, profoundly in love with Sophia, pursuing her, but never quite able to comprehend her elusive person. At most, he touches her with his fingertips, but she soon escapes his grasp. I apologize for the sexiest sounding implications of my words. It would seem that I am implying only males can be philosophers, as I have reserved the pronoun he to indicate the philosopher. My only excuse is that I want to see the image of Liber and the beloved frequently in this text and Sophia. Besides being feminine in Greek, is a very common girl's name in many languages. From this, we would emphasize that humanity would be the first necessary qualification of any philosopher worth his her salt. A philosopher is one who treks a weary but ever so existing and adventure way along paths less trod to an ever receding horizon. The truth is there, but is always tantalizingly just beyond his her reach. A good philosopher leads us but one step nearer to the truth, but is never so smug as to claim that we have ensured Dame Sophia once and for all in the misses of human finite intelligence. We might even go on add that philosophy must be a community project. There is only so much that an individual human mind can grasp. Reality is far too rich, uh, far too complex to be stuffed into the slender limits of the individual brain. Bet it that of Madame Curie or Professor Einstein. Besides, each of us approaches persons or things from our particular perspective. Some have called this the pre-understanding, which comprises, among other things, our individual culture, our mother tongue, family upbringing, religious background, even if we think we have rejected it long ago. All these somehow or the other influence, if not prejudice, our perceptions. It is impossible to take a totally natural, unbiased view of things. At best, we can try to become progressively more aware of our pre-understanding and give up native assumptions about objectivity. I am rather asking us to be on guard against hasty and presumptuous assertions that we have come to plan unvarnished and objective visions of reality. Wherever, whatever it it should be quite clear that none of us deliberately and willfully admits prejudices into our perceptual makeup. People hold prejudices unconsciously as a rule. Once they become conscious of the fact that they have been nourishing prejudices, they give them up, assuming they have the honesty and courage to do so. But how can we become aware if our prejudices only by dialoguing with people of other backgrounds, other nations, other cultures, other creed? If if I isolate myself with people who think exactly as I do and never venture to meet people with other worldviews, I and my gang will simply confirm each other in way favorite prejudices and narrow mindedness. Philosophy and science. For quite some time, especially since the advent of the scientific age, philosophy has had a bad press. In fact, many philosophers themselves, including the father of modern philosophy, Rene Descartes, lamented because the philosophy lacked the precision and certainty of themselves at the turn of the last century. Edmund Husserl was still dreaming of a philosophy that would be an exact science, yielding unquestionable certainty based on uh, indubitable evidence and proofs. And it does look as if philosophy is a kind of third rate disciple, since, as we have said above, it cannot give us guaranteed once and for all exact answers. But is this really such a blemish? Let us take a closer look at the issue. If I may borrow an insight from the contemporary French existentialist thinker Greville Marcel, we should make a clear distinction between problems and mysteries, even though in popular speech we use them almost interchangeably. A problem is a question of which I am not a part, whereas a mystery is a question of which I am a part. For example, take a question: what is the chemical composition of table salt? I am not part of the question, so it is a problem. However, the question: is there such a thing as true love? Or is there life after death? They, these are mystery questions because they concern me personally. True love and life after death are issues with which my life is immediately bound up. Even the question, does God exist, or even what is God like, are mystery questions, not because I am trying to say that I am part of God, but because if God exists, then I would somehow be very intimately linked with the divinity. So far, we have noted how problem and mystery differ from the point of view of the kind of question they ask. Let us move on to their answers. Precisely because I am not part of the problem, part of a problem question, I can detach myself from it and observe it objectively. Submit it to experiments in the laboratory or elsewhere, and given enough time and equipment, work out a final exhaustive once and for all answers. But I cannot do that with a mystery question, is in as much as I am part of it. I cannot detach myself from it any more that than then I can detach myself from myself. That is why I cannot in principle even work out that kind of answer for a mystery. Science is busy with problems. That is why science can attain a high level of certainty and demonstrations on proof. Though even scientists nowadays are not so cocksure about their certainties. Philosophy, like theology and religion, is busy with mysteries, and that is why it can at best throw some more light on the complexities of the issue. No more, it should be clear, critical, and coherent. But this does not mean that philosophy or theology or religion are irresponsible and whimsical subjects to be pursued by uh, di- dilettantes according to their fads and fancies. Even if its responses cannot partake of that level of absolute certainty that the positive sciences allegedly claim. It has to be orderly, painstaking and observant as any other study. It has to be critical of its presuppositions and pre-understanding, submit all its reasoning to the strict canons of logic, and so on. Philosophy is not a science, but is a systematic scientific discipline. Understanding religion. Religion is one of those words that dictionaries tell us have an unknown or doubtful etymology. That is, there is a Latin word religare, to tie up again, which is the closest contender for its source, but that is highly doubtful. Is this mean to tell us that religion is a set of rules and regulations that binds us up again after the civil code has finished uh, enmeshing us? This would imply a very legalistic and uninspiring understanding of religion, indeed one that would hardly inspire much commitment from most of us. Theology is a kind of close relative of it, and it means literally God talks. In practice, however, theology is usually associated with the study of some allegedly revealed book. Thus, Christian theology takes off from the Bible, Jewish theology starts from the Torah, Islamic theology studies the Quran, Hindu theology delves into say the Gita and so on. However, it would not be quite correct to link all religions with some scripture claimed to be divinity revealed, for there are many tribal religions without a holy book other than the great book of nature in which God stands revealed to his people. Indeed, not all religions even accept the notion of God. At least two religions, Jainism and one school of Buddhism, rejects the whole idea of God, as they are atheistics. What then is the most basic idea common to all religions? It is the idea of the sacred. Various authors have tried to give a rough summary definition of this as a holy other. Uh, Guns and the highly powerful and hence dangerous, high voltage, do not touch, and so on. In general, there seems to come a time when we suddenly become convinced that there is more to life that all that we can merely see or hear or touch or smell or feel. This can happen when one is caught up in the mystery of childbirth. When a young mother holds in her exhausted arms the first babe she is ever given birth to, or when the proud and humbled father holds in his trembling arms his tiny firstborn, or when one stands on the seashore and contemplates the mighty ocean rolling back and forth, or when one is hushed by the panorama of natural and serene beauty that life exposed from lofty mountain top, or in so many other cases where powerful emotions of love or anger or joy or resolve overwhelms us. Out of this arises the experience of the sacred, which some of us interpret merely as an aspect of ourselves, the human shadow writ large, and others remain equally convinced that it is a genuine experience of the divine. There is also the idea of salvation or liberation, which is common to all religions, though it may be understood very differently. Don't we all feel when we read the papers on watch TV that the time is really bad, or that something has gone wrong, horribly wrong with the world? Don't we all dream of a world of justice and love and peace, where all people will live in harmony as brothers and sisters, and not bully or tortoise various groups or on the basis of ethnic or other differences, just as Anna Hazare's team dream of a corruption-free India? And do not even the best of us recognize within ourselves that psychologists mm, ourselves what psychologists call a shadow side, a strange inner urge to cheat and steal, to take the line of least resistance, to lie and exploit others. Very often we fight against these mysterious promptings, temptations, as some prefer to call them. Oftentimes we give in due to pressure of circumstances, to peer influence, or plain and simple cowardice and laziness. All religions offer us various ways and means to overcome these unpleasant tendencies. They offer us guidance and advise us to try meditation, prayer, and other ways to control our passions and less healthy drives. Finally, all religions are communitarian expressions. Indeed, religions emerge when people come together, share their experience, and somehow or the other arrive at certain helpful structures which bind them to each other and facilitate the expression and celebration of their common vision. Thus, religions as communitarian expressions of shared convictions become structured or institutionalized. But this is what makes many serious minded and sincerely religious people suspicious of religion, or to put it more precisely, at the highly organized and formal religious setups or structures that they are confronted with. Is it really necessary to pray and worship according to these strict and impersonal structures? Wouldn't it be more fulfilling, spontaneous, and meaningful to do it quietly at home? And do we need to be bossed about by religious leaders who may be themselves self-centered? Philosophy of religion towards a definition. According to some people, the very idea of philosophizing about religion is blasphemy. Isn't it a form of the most cross arrogance and irreligiosity to submit the notion of the sacred, of God, and of Holy Writ to the critical probings of finite, limited human intelligence? Would not the only appropriate human response to the experience of the sacred be humble, silent, and respectful submission and adoration? In the West, Martin Luther, the fiery German reformer, spearheaded this approach, fulminating against reasons as the devil's greatest whore, e- averring that it can do nothing but shame and disgrace all that God says and does. For him, there was a mortal enmity between faith and reasons. Faith strikes dead this reason and kills this best, which have heaven and earth and all creatures cannot destroy. Among Eastern thinkers who have championed such a view, perhaps the most outspoken was the medieval Islamic scholar and mystic Al-Ghazali, who in his Destruction of Philosophers tells us in no uncertain terms what he thought of those who used reason in the course of their search for God. Thomas Aquinas, later canonized by the Catholic Church, was more positive in his attitude towards reason and philosophy in the context of religion, though he was no crass rationalist. The same too could be said of Ibn Sina, whose name was Latinized into Avicenna by the scholastics, and whom Al-Ghazali saw as his arch enemy, co-religionist of his, though he was desperate. Extreme polarizations are seldom productive, and this is quite true of the pure reason versus blind faith. Class over religion, the faith alone approach opens the door to uncritical, self deluded psych- psychotics and fanatics. But reason alone is no improvement absolute rationalism. I'll only accept what can stand up is a rigorous proof is both impractical and irrational. Among other things, it would exclude any possibility of interpersonal relationships like love and friendship, and not only religion's faith. An absolute rationalist, were he or she to act consistently, would be condemned to a lonely, loveless, or friendless, and not just religious, faithless life. And just for the record, it is interesting to note that the Catholic Church has officially condemned as heresies both of these attitudes, fideism, faith alone, and ex- exaggerated rationalism, reason alone. From the preceding, we may conclude that the most appropriate response would be balanced midpoint between the two extremes approach, which I would venture to designate as a reasonable risk. Indeed, what we do to validate any interpersonal commitment, including love and friendship, and not only religious faith, we establish some demonstrable ground to justify our commitment. However, since we are dealing with free persons and their invisible interior lives, there can never be foolproof guarantee as to the certainty and security of the commitment one is making. There is a solid basis of reasonableness, but not absolute rationality. The the commitment is not grounded on blind risk. There is some evidence in favor of one's personal commitment. It can stand up to considerable critical inquisition, yet the possibility of being mistaken is not totally ruled out. Hence, there is an element of risk. It is neither un- unfounded risk nor undoubtable argument, but halfway between both, drawing upon the strength of each to avoid the excesses of either. Between these two extremes of fideism and exaggerated rationalism comes philosophy of religion, which holds that religion can be critically examined. So, philosophy of religion is an attempt based on reason to criticize, evaluate, and deepen religion. It may explain it, elaborate on it, and even propose new theoretical concepts. Thus, the American philosopher William P. Alston defined philosophy of religion as a branch of philosophy concerned with questions regarding religion, including the nature and existence of God, the examination of religious experience, analysis of religious language and text, and the relationship of religion and science. In short, philosophy of religion is a critical response to religion where the faith of the seeker is bracketed out. Necessity of organized religion. The scope of philosophy is any critical appraisal of religion. It is an ancient discipline being found in the earliest known manuscripts concerning philosophy and related to many other branches of philosophy and general thought, including metaphysics, epistemology, logic, and history. Let us briefly raise some pertinent questions related to the scope and relevance of philosophy of religion in the following pages. Let us begin by admitting the fact that historically not organized religion can stand up to honest criticism and come out of it with an unblemished report card. None of the mainline religions has proved itself to have been always and everywhere a reliable friend of people struggling for liberation and emancipation. Often, religions have added to the oppression, discrimination, and bloodletting that have plowed the world since time began. The subjugation of women has often been given a religious sanction. The most cruel and bloodthirsty wars have been inspired by religious differences, with each side proclaiming an exclusive God, God met us, God with us, while hailing all opponents as hirelings of Satan incarnate. Religion has often opposed scientific research and sided with obs- obscurantism and superstition against trend of enlightenment. And politicians, especially in third world countries, have learned that religion is the easiest handle with which to manipulate impoverished and oppressed masses, is stirring stirring up all kinds of mob violence and building up their vote banks. Indeed, religious leadership seems to be the last bastion of male ex- exclusivism, determined to hold out against female incursions by all manner of pseudo theological, philosophical, and sociological arguments so as to preserve power in the hands of men only. The priestly conquerors club is a very powerful and jealously guarded coterie of old men who, with bulldog tenacity, clings with alarm to its is- ever shrinking list of list of privileges and prerogatives. Above all, it stands ready to flash its magic wand of God's will and the divinely established scheme of things. To justify the project, the status quo heavily loaded in its favor and block any attempt at reform which just might, among other things, help towards a more authentic encounter with God. On the other hand, there always is another hand, isn't it? Religions have also inspired many to selfless service of the downtrodden, have given the human race a rich legacy of art and beauty, as well as played a not insignificant role in opening our eyes to the essential dignity of the human person, irrespective of race, color, and sex. Some religious personalities, Mother Teresa, Dorothy Day, Mahatma Gandhi, Oscar Romero, Desmond Tutu, have been true friends of liberation movements. Yet, when all is said and done, it would appear that some kind of institutionalization or organization of religion is inevitable unless we are quite prepared to accept the consequences of reducing it to some sort of private, abstract, and spiritual preoccupation. In fact, we can cite at least three major reasons why some kind of organization in religion is not merely to be tolerated and unavoidable, but even accepted as inevitable. First, in as much as we are embodied beings, we cannot be satisfied with an intangible something which remains at that level. Anything that we take seriously must be embodied and tangibilized in some way through some manner of institutionalization, just as our love for our country has to be given tangible expression in flag hosting and march past, and our love for our family and friends has to be rendered incarnate in birthday parties and family gatherings. Anything less would but uh, uh, but touch us lightly and leave us with a profound sense of frustration. Secondly, if religion is to have some special significance, if it is a uh, if it is to have some transformative reformative impact upon society, inspiring people to work for justice and peace, or in support of the environment, it requires some kind of communication expression. Finally, if it is not to become a fleeting fly by night sort of thing, here today and gone tomorrow, coming to birth and dying with each individual's alleged encounter with the powers that be, it must have some concrete form to ensure the sharing, preservation, and development of its tradition. Actually, if we look a bit more closely, at the objections against organized religion, it would preferably become clear that these objections are not so much aimed at the very fact that these religions are organized, but at rigid authoritarian way in which they have been organized. This is the real villain. That is the real villain. A timely qualification. I have mentioned that organized religion is somehow inevitable, and even more that it is not a bad thing. Indeed, there is no reason why we cannot envisage institutionalized religions being organized in a more user-friendly, democratic, and less authoritarian way. Religions should encourage us to respect other traditions, religious or otherwise, learn from their insights, and promote unity in diversity in lieu of upholding a soulless, monotonous uniformity. In other words, my recognition of the necessity of organized religion does not by any means imply that I give my wholehearted and uncritical support to the actual way in which contemporary institutionalized religions are, in fact, organized far from it. And when later I use terms like oppressive and liberative when speaking of concrete religious setups in today's world, I will not be insinuating that any one particular religion and its structures are liberative and to be encouraged, while that of all others is simply oppressive and not oppressive and to be resisted. My connection is that every organized religion is susceptible of a liberative and an oppressive interpretation. Indeed, there is even such a thing as oppressive and liberative atheism. It is all a question as to whether the atheist or believer is ultimately seeking the enhancement and development of the entire human person or not. It is this that makes all the difference. The there sees of organized religion. The basis of authentic religion is a personal and mystical encounter with God. The Gens Andere, or whatever be one's preferred description of whatever is experienced in religious activity, nor is this mystical experience as uh, esoteric and unattainable as many people think. All that is and that it requires on our part is a pre predisposing attitude of humanity, of openness, the heart of a little child. And this is difficult because it is so easy. The more we consider ourselves religiously learned, the more more meticulous we are in performing our religious duties, the bigger is the occupational hazard of mistaking the pointing finger of the moon, not to mention the hazards of falling into spiritual pride or intolerance. In fact, it is the religious fanatic whose mind and heart is too far removed from that of a little child to be open to any genuine encounter with the gens Andre, who invariably becomes the self-appointed, overzealous, and merciless enforcer of the rigid observance of the unholy trinity of code creed cult, which is his deliberate choice of the masculine tyrannical substitute divinity. And the religious fanatic is basically unsure of his convictions. This that is why he has to burn, maim, or blow up those who don't replicate his approach. The existence of people who see or think differently from him is a threat to Ben on insecure vision. Creed is a kind of summary list of the particular doctrine to which all would be followers of the specific religions are required to give their unqualified assent. In a very tightly organized religion, failure to do so would invite unpleasant repercussions. To begin with, one would be held a heretic, schismatic, infidel, gentle, or whatever be the current term of opprobrium in the Ragging fanatics vocabulary. Once upon a time, such qualification would have resulted in one's death sentence, being kidnapped, carried away, stoned, hanged on, and quartered, removed from the land of the living by some form of ostracism, excommunication, or another ingenious and if efficacious means of silencing dissent. In our more enlightened times, the fanatic has to settle for more civilized and unbloody devices, censure, withdrawal of one's license to teach, banning, and or burning of one's books. Of course, the believing community has very right to judge which enunciations of faith convictions authentically express the commonly held convictions of the general body of the faithful, but it should be the community or a truly representative body of it that sees, judges, and acts, not an over centralized, over-aged, conservative, and all male select band of people with vested interest, close to all other points of view or perspectives. Such executive, legislative, judiciary power should not be allowed to be monopolized by a small inbreeding conquerors club jealous of its power and position. Code comprises all those moral rules and derived customs that followers of a particular organized regions are supposed to live by day to day. These may include styles of dress, dietary prescriptions, allotted holy days for worship, uh, penitential times for fasting, and as on. Most religions seem to agree on a basic moral principles as respect for elders, no stealing, and the like. There is a difference of opinion, however, as regards certain issues on sex as a birth control and some other areas as the use of violence even in times of war and so on. There was a time when all religions were so intimately linked with state policy that any contravention of the religious code was considered a tremendous act against the state, and the culprit was turned over to the secular arm for punishment. Nowadays, most religions have voluntarily, or reluctantly relinquished such links and have had to content themselves with merely issuing moral condemnations against offenders, warning true believers against consorting with such persons or listening to their views, while, while while appealing to the recalcitrant to mend their ways. One might mention that penal sanctions for infringements of the religious code, whenever enforceable, have tended to be rather inhuman, cruel, and undignified. Cult. Cult refers to the various rubrics that governs how official, individual, or communitarian worship of a particular religion is to be carried out. This may include a host of minutiae such as who is authorized to conduct the form of prayer, what vestments the priest or officials are supposed to wear, what precise words and gestures are to be when, which symbolic objects are to be employed in what way and at what precise moment in the event, and so on. The degree of the degree of meticulousness with which these are to be observed varies from religion to religion. Quite frequently, it is required that the service be conducted in the same ancient language that was current when the religion first saw the light of day, even if the language a dead one, a foreign tongue in most cases, unknown to the vast majority of the devotees. Invariably, the ritual is considered invalid and inefficacious if some item of these detail has not been scrupulously observed. Let us sum up. In this unit, we have attempted to give a definition of philosophy of religion. Then we tried to see its scope. Behold, that the scope of philosophy of religion is a whole of religion. Thus, we discussed briefly on organized religion and on the three C's that constitute religion. Then we noted that reason needs to be challenged and even purified by reason. It is these very concrete, very visible, and obtrusive elements that most often irritate serious and sincere religious people. They want to encounter the divine in a community and express their devotion in words and gestures that rise spontaneously from themselves. What happens when they enter a traditional place of worship? They are put into uh, lit- liturgical straitjackets and told where they have to place themselves far from the center of activity, what passive roles they must play throughout. Invariably, they are issued a handbook with detailed instructions as to what pre-planned words and gestures they are permitted to use and at what moment, and quite often they are not permitted to address God in their own mother tongue, the language of their hearts and most personal exchanges, but in some obscure discourse whose very alphabet, let alone meaning, is incomprehensible to them. As remote rituals figure, few can figure out what they are all about, save a handful of erudite archaic specialists. So much for cult. What of the elements of creed and code? Many a time these are couched in a form that has remained impervious to the development of science and technology. If people dare to voice their questions or doubts, they are often met with reproach and a call to practice the virtue of blind faith. It is these shameless bits of obscurantism, not mention downright ignorance, that put off young people as well as religious seekers of a deeper, more personal conviction, driving them out of church, temple, and other traditional places of worship. This is borne out by the mushrooming of all manners of charismatic and people's communities, where worship is more spontaneous and free, where leadership is shared by all the worshippers who have a more active role to play, where clerical intervention is minimal, if not down to absolute zero. It is not organized religion that is the real problem for most people, but the inhuman way it is organized. To call religion back to its original goal, we need discourse and criticism or philosophy of religion. Keywords: Gens Endere. Rudolf Otto's Gens Endere means "wholly other" or "of a different realm". Fideism: reliance on faith alone rather than scientific reasoning or philosophy in question of religion. Alvin Plantinga defines fideism as an exclusive or basic reliance upon faith alone, accompanied by the consequent disparagement of reason and utilized especially in the pursuit of philosophical or religious truth. Thank you.